Hey everybody, this is Robert from Black Belt Gaming. I hope you're doing well. I was going to make another video here in my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons series. This is going to be a bit of a crazy video. It's going to jump through several different books. But I thought I would talk about a character that was just very memorable for me. And it wasn't my character. It was the character of a friend of mine who introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons. There were two older guys that helped introduce me to D&D. One of them was 4 years older than me, and the other one was 3 years older than me. The guy that was 4 years older than me hated to DM. He always wanted to play. And there's a big difference between, say, a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old. So he was kind of the boss, and he liked it that way. The really good DM we had was 3 years older than me. And he was a really strong DM. He could tell a good story. He was very descriptive, and he could also make some really tough rulings that I've shared about in some of the other videos. But I really want to talk about the character that this guy had that was 4 years older than me. And his character was of a race of beings from this book, The Fiend Folio. Now, when I was playing the game, I had no idea that you could use races from the monster books. And it was just, pretty free and open to do whatever you wanted to do back in those days. And so I just kind of went right by the book. But let's take a look and see what this character was. If I'm ever referring to one of my friends who had the Munchkin character, that's this guy. So let me tell you about it. All right, I'm going to refer to this guy as D. That was the first name, and that was the first letter in his name. D's character was a deep gnome, a SVIRFNEBLIN, as they're called in the Fiend Folio. I had no idea what a deep gnome was, and I'd never encountered one in an adventure. I just knew what they were because that's what this guy's character was. This guy was already a much higher level than any character I ever had back in those days. And his main character was called Bolt Storm, and he was a deep gnome. So let's take a look here at the deep gnome. I don't have any particular stories about the deep gnomes as far as encountering one as an adventurer. But like I said, I'm going to tell you about them because of a player character who played one. They have a great armor class. It says 2 or better, so we're already talking, what here? An 18 or better armor class. Is that right? I think so. I think I'm doing the math correct. Hard to hit these guys. Hit dice 3 plus 6, and number of attacks 1 or 2. I can't remember exactly why that is. But they have these special attacks, special defenses, some natural magic resistance. They're exceptionally intelligent, and they're neutral. And I would say that the guy that was playing this character was really neutral. He was really out for himself. So what are some of their special attacks and such? Deep gnomes have the ability to do things, some kind of illusionist-like spells like blindness, blur, and change self. They can do these, I think, once per day. Some deep gnomes, and this guy, of course, could do it, have the ability to summon an earth elemental. And when I was telling you about the adventure, the very first adventure I went on, as I've given it more thought over the years and tried to remember more and more about that game, I'm almost positive it was this character that was leading the party that time, because if you remember, if you've watched that video, one of the characters steps forward to summon an earth elemental. And I was a little confused at the time why a Zorn appeared. Well, if you're looking in the Fiend Folio and the Deep Gnomes that have the ability to summon an Earth Elemental, there's this chart, and you can roll, I think it's a D12, to determine the strength of the elemental that appears. There's even, if you roll poorly, the summoning will fail altogether. But just above the level of failure is probably the weakest level of Earth Elemental that can appear, and it's a Zorn. And so I'm almost positive that's what happened. That must have been Boltstorm here stepping forward to summon an Earth Elemental, and the DM rolled. Or knowing him, he may have just chosen, because of that particular DM, he may have just chosen the weakest one. I don't know. But it ended up being a Zorn. So, Deep Gnomes have some other natural stealth-like abilities to remain undetected or hide really well. They have the ability to see in the dark. I think it's infravision back in those days. And they, as far as being a creature from the booklet here, the Fiend Folio, they often carried these darts that they could throw these darts and get like a +2 to attack with them. And I think the tips of the darts had some sort of gas or something in it. It was like a poison gas. And I don't think it was lethal. I think it did something to just sort of inhibit your ability to see them and follow them. I don't know if it was paralysis or what. But I don't remember the character, Boltstorm, having anything like that. I don't remember him carrying those kind of things. But I do remember one thing. Whenever I've referred to, again, if I've already said this, I'm sorry, but whenever I referred to in my videos the guy that had the Munchkin character, that's this guy. And so I'm going to tell you what he carried. He didn't carry these darts. He carried something ridiculous. Now, he didn't have this in the early days, but after I'd been playing with these guys for a few years, he showed up to the game table with something that was just outrageous. If you recall, in a previous video, I talked about a guy who spoke to me about GARL GLITTERGOLD and how much it was just fascinating to hear him talk about GARL GLITTERGOLD as if he was a real god, and what his character was doing to try to appeal and reach out to GARL GLITTERGOLD. Well, that was Boltstorm. Boltstorm was a gnome, and GARL GLITTERGOLD is the god of the gnomes. Now, not deep gnomes specifically, but gnomes. And so I guess he thought it appropriate to try to worship GARL. Now, GARL GLITTERGOLD's worshipper's alignment is lawful good. And I'll tell you, this guy, Boltstorm, was not lawful good. I've got some other stories to explain why. But anyway, lawful good, maybe that's why he never got any response from GARL GLITTERGOLD. But what I'm getting at is the thing that the character eventually got hold of was the flail of the Gnolls. Let me take you to the monster manual. Well, this is the demon lord of the Gnolls. It's out of the monster manual. Supposedly, D was playing in a game with a different DM, another friend of his from school that was his age. And this guy was a pushover DM. And supposedly, Boltstorm had fought against the demon lord of the Gnolls, and they had killed it. And so this thing, let's see, how would you pronounce his name? Yeonoghu. They fought this thing and they killed it. It has an armor class of -5. So what are we saying here? 25 maybe to hit this thing. 100 hit points. Special attacks, special defenses. It takes a +1 or better weapon to hit it. 80% magical resistance, exceptionally intelligent, and it's chaotic evil, and 12 feet tall. So that's going to be important in a moment. But Boltstorm, Dee's character, showed up at the table one night. We were about to play. The other DM, I'll say his name was R. That's the first letter of his name. R, the DM, was most often the DM for us. And I told you he could be pretty strict and have some pretty intensive rulings from time to time. He was like, all right, D, tell me about your character. What's going on with him and what does he have? And he kind of knew to do this as a routine because D was often so overpowered. And he said, yeah, I played in a game with, and Boltstorm went on an adventure in one of T's adventures. We'll start his name with a T. And he said, oh, God. He said, what happened? And he said, well, Boltstorm now has the flail of the Gnolls. And I remember R, the DM, he just went, oh, jeez, and did kind of that face wipe. And the flail that this thing has, it has 3 spiked heads on it. And when you attack with this thing, each one of those heads gets an attack roll. And it counts as 1 attack. And that's kind of important to the multi-attack rule. It doesn't count as 3 separate attacks. But each one of these rolls a 2 hit, and they do different things. I think one of the heads by itself does 3 to 18 points of damage. But then the other 2 have some sort of abilities, like, I don't know if it's to paralyze you, confuse you, something like that. You have to make a bunch of saving throws. It's a very powerful weapon. And so he was saying that he had that, and that was his primary weapon now. And I had been playing, he didn't have this in the early days. He had this after I'd been gaming with these guys for a number of years. And I remember flipping through the monster manual as he was describing his battle with this thing. And I was curious about the flail. And I looked it up, and I said, hey, D, do you know that flail is 12 feet tall? I'm not 12 feet tall, 7 feet tall. And I said, you're a gnome. And so can you imagine a gnome wielding a flail that is 7 feet tall? It's the most ridiculous thing. But I remember D looking over to me and saying, oh, really? Wow, thanks for telling me that. And then he just moved on with the conversation as if that had never been mentioned, because he really wanted his character to have that awesome thing. And so that was one of the most Munchkin things I had ever seen. A player, whether he really went on an adventure and got this thing, or whether he flipped through the book and thought, hey, that's a mean weapon, I'm just going to make up a story and tell the DM that I got this thing. I have no idea. I wouldn't put it past D to do that. But anyway, he had it and somehow was claiming that it was his size and that he could use it. And although R, the DM, was none too pleased about that, he let him have it. And I think that was another thing. Back in those days, the DM had tremendous power. And if he wanted to get you, he could get you. So I might do another video on how the DM's power could be abused, because this video is kind of like how characters can become Munchkin and sort of abuse what they have. It could definitely be handled by a crafty DM. And so anyway, that's Boltstorm and his flail of the Gnolls. Before I had mentioned that Bolt here wasn't of good alignment. Remember, the guy playing this, D, was about 4 years older than we were. So whenever he was playing with us, there were times where I don't remember what his class was. I think part of him was it a fighter, magic user? I can't recall. But I know to this day that Boltstorm had the sleep spell, because he used to just bully us with that. As we would start an adventure and sort of get out in a tunnel or something, he would turn around and cast sleep on us. And we would all collapse. And D would say, "All right, give me your character sheets." And R, the DM, wouldn't say anything. And so there was no saving throw against that. And it was effective against very low-level creatures. So we'd all give our character sheets to D, and he'd look them over. And if there was anything he wanted, he would take it from us. And so that was just a totally... I'm thinking of a bunch of bad words here. That was totally a nasty move. It was bullying us, is what he was doing. But that's what he would do, and he would scour our character sheets. So if we had any cool magical items or particularly valuable gems or whatever, he'd take them. And he would feel that as the party leader and the one that we were most dependent on, he felt totally entitled to taking a fee from us. And we'd groan and complain, but if the DM wasn't going to do anything about it, what were we supposed to do? Just say, "Fine, I'm going to quit and go home"? I mean, maybe we could have done that, but we really wanted to play, so it was just part of the pain of playing with that guy back then. So I would still say that the good far outweighed the bad, but it was not always a pleasure to adventure with Boltstorm. Well, with all this being said about the Deep Gnome Boltstorm and how much of a munchkin he could be and how he could kind of bully the other players in the group, me and my friends, I've got to say there were numerous times I was actually glad he was in the party. He saved my character's life more than once. And I do have to say that when things got nasty, Boltstorm was always up front and center, trying to deal with it. So in the previous video where we were fighting the Wraith, I believe that was possibly Boltstorm up there taking those energy drain hits. And there's been other times, including facing off against a dragon and some other situations where I was glad he was there, and I was glad that he was as powerful as he was. So, alright, thanks for watching this, everybody. I know it jumped through several different books and covered some different topics, but it was sort of part monster manual, part deities and demigods, part player's handbook, just all thrown together. But I really wanted to just tell you about this Munchkin player, because I mentioned him so many times in the different videos. I haven't mentioned his character name yet, but that was his name. And anyway, I'd be interested to hear in the comments if you ever had to play with anybody like that, or were you ever like that when you played. So it was a lot of fun. Sometimes it was frustrating, but just very memorable for gaming back in the 80s like that. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you later.